history at Virginia College in Charleston, South Carolina. I'm also the author of a number of books, including one called Mr. Potts and Me, which I wrote some years ago. It's loosely based on the stories that my dad told me as I was coming up, as well as my friendship with an older man by the name of Walter Snipe, who you see on the cover here, who was sort of my surrogate grandfather. And between these two men, I got a lot of wisdom as a child, and so I put all of these into this story about this confused little boy who meets this wise old man who tells him all these stories that helps them get through life. Now, one of the stories deals with the fact that while there are some wise adults, there are many wise adults as a matter of fact, there are adults out there who are not so wise. And here's the story about one of them that's in that book. One day, Mr. Potts and Lucas and his wife were sitting at home enjoying a pleasant afternoon when all of a sudden came a knock at the door. And so Mrs. Potts said, "Who is it?" And a voice said, "Hey, this is Mandy Brown." And Mr. Potts is like, "Mandy Brown? Man, I don't want that ignorant old biddy in my house talking all that fool talk." And Mrs. Potts says, "Hey, Ernest, don't say all that stuff around Lucas. Man, I don't care if he hears this or not. This is my house and the man's house is castle. I ain't having that ignorant old biddy here talking that fool talk." And so he stormed out of the room, and Mrs. Potts chased him. Ernie, come on with all that stuff." So she kept knocking on the door, and Lucas, he's a little kid. He doesn't know what's going on here. He opens the door, and all of a sudden, Mandy Brown comes in. Girl, let me tell you what happened. Guess what? The preacher's daughter, she went on this picnic the other day with that Mason boy, and guess what? 2 went out and 3 came back, and she looked around and she didn't see anybody, and she heard a voice saying, "Hey, Miss Brown." And she looked down. "Oh, it's you." See, Mandy didn't like Lucas because, her kids didn't amount to a whole lot, and Lucas was a pretty intelligent child who had a fairly good background and all that. And she had a lot of envy toward him because he was everything that her kids weren't. So she said, "Oh, it's you, that Moore boy. How everything been since your daddy dropped dead a few years ago?" And he looks up at her like, what is with this lady? "Anyway, is Miss Potts home?" Yeah, she's right over here." "Well, anyway, Miss Potts, let me tell y'all all about what happened." And, well, she still didn't see her. So she figured, oh, well, I might as well talk to him while he's here. So she said, "You still doing all that reading and stuff, huh?" And she said, and he said, "Oh, yeah, I like to read and all that." "Yeah, well, let me tell you something. Don't you know all that reading gonna drive you fool one day?" He's like, what is she talking about? She goes, "Yeah, because, let me tell you something. All that reading and talking proper you doing, that's white folks stuff. And the thing is, don't you understand, even the good books say that we was cursed." "Huh?" "That's right. Even the Bible say that we is cursed, Call it the curse of Ham under Noah and all that. So, some things just ain't for us, you just go out and you get a good job and you stay out of jail and you'll be all right." So Mr. Potts then came into the room and said, "Amen, hallelujah, Mandy, that's absolutely right." And Mrs. Potts, she walked in after their argument, and she was surprised, like, huh? He's acting nice to her? And Mandy's like, huh? This is strange. Mr. Potts says, "Amen, Mandy, let me tell you something. You sure did right to tell that boy that. And let me tell you something, how much I think of how well you taught that boy." And everybody's looking at Mr. Potts like, what's going on here? And then Mr. Potts held up the Bible that was on nearby the kitchen table and said, "Mandy, you preaching so good, let me hear you read some more of that wisdom to this boy." And Mandy said, well, Ernie, I wouldn't do that, sir, but, I ain't got my glasses." "Oh, that's all right, Mandy." And so he reached over into one of the nearby drawers and said, "Here's a magnifying glass. You can read it like that." And Mandy says, "Well, I think I better be going now." And she then went out, and Mr. Potts closed the door and laughed while Mrs. Potts sitting there with her arms folded, not too happy with this. And Lucas was confused. He's a kid. He's like, "What happened there, Mr. Potts?" And Mr. Potts said, Mr. Potts says, "Let me tell you something. You know all that stuff that Mandy said was in the Bible about black folks, being slaves for life and all that kind of stuff?" "Yeah." Well, you know why she couldn't tell you what was in the Bible? No, why? Number one, it ain't in the Bible. There's no such thing like that in the Bible. And number two, she couldn't read it to you out the Bible because she can't read. I don't get it. See, boy, let me explain something to you. You know, back in the days, our folks weren't able to go to school. And they had to go by what they were told. And, you know, back when they were slaves and all of that, they were only told things that would keep them slaves. Now, my folks, they didn't believe in that junk. You know, after slavery ended, they sent us to school so we can do better and, you know, take advantage of this newfound freedom. Mandy's folks didn't do that. You know, Mandy's folks, you know, they stayed in the field and they didn't see nothing beyond them other than the field. So they still had that field and slave thinking, you know. Let me give you an example of that. Remember that dog you had called Boxer? Yeah, I remember Boxer. Yeah, well, you know, I remember one time when you was about 6 years old. You probably don't remember that now. But one time your daddy used to have Boxer all chained up in the backyard on a leash. And, you know, you were like, man, Dad, let Boxer run around some. Let's build a yard for him. So your daddy built you a yard, and then when the yard was built, he went back there to take that chain off of Boxer, and a cat came by, right? But when the cat came by, Boxer saw the cat and went, rah, rah, rah. Guess what? Even though that chain was no longer on his neck, it was still in his mind, and he acted like that chain was still on his neck. So you see, Luke, you got to understand something. That's why I want you to read. Be somebody. Do something. Because, see, folks like Mandy, you know, even though they don't have the chains on their bodies no more, well, that was their parents that had it, and grandparents that had the chains. But see, even though there's no chains on their bodies, some still have that chains on your mind. And the best way you can get that chain of ignorance off your mind is by reading, studying, and learning as much as you can. Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoyed that story, there are many more like it in this book, Mr. Potts and Me, which you can find on the Evening Post Books website, www.eveningpostbooks.com. This is Damon Fordham talking about the chains of ignorance. Have a good day.